The first time I kissed Ben in front of her, I felt my soul split cleanly in two. It was at a crowded rooftop bar, all twinkling lights and the clink of glasses, a perfect scene of urban romance I had meticulously staged. His lips were dry, his touch expected, a performance I had choreographed with the precision of a military operation, every smile and lingering glance calculated for an audience of one. But my eyes, against my will, found hers across the flaming heater. Clara. Her face was a serene mask, a masterpiece of composure, but her hands, usually so still and capable resting on the table, were clenched around her wineglass, her knuckles bleached of all color, a tiny, violent betrayal of the earthquake I had just triggered. In that moment, the taste of Ben's beer on my lips turned to ash. The sound of the city below, the laughter of our friends, it all faded into a dull, meaningless roar, and all I could feel was the violent, silent scream building in my chest, a pressure cooker of self-loathing and desperate, forbidden love. This was the charade I had chosen, the safe, straight path that felt like walking on a bed of nails, all to hide the terrifying, brilliant truth that my heart had never been mine to give away. It had been hers from the moment we'd met, a fact as fundamental and unchangeable as my own heartbeat. It started in the quiet hush of a university library, a place that had always been my sanctuary from the noisy, demanding world. I was a graduate student buried in 19th century poetry, building a careful, orderly life as a bulwark against the messy, unpredictable nature of my own desires I had spent a lifetime trying to stuff into a box labeled inappropriate. She was the new archivist, a woman whose presence seemed to change the very quality of the air, making it thicker, more charged. Clara had a stillness about her, a centered calm that drew my frantic, anxious energy like a magnet. Her hair was the color of dark honey, and she wore it in a simple, thick braid that draped over one shoulder, a strand always coming loose to frame her face. Her hands, when she handled the fragile, yellowed manuscripts, were reverent, her touch speaking of a deep, innate patience I could only envy. Our first real interaction was over a box of donated letters from a forgotten Victorian poetess. I had requested them for my research, and she brought them to my usual corral in the corner, her movements quiet and efficient, a ghost in the silent stacks. Our fingers brushed during the exchange, a simple, accidental touch that sent a current of awareness straight up my arm, so startling I almost dropped the precious, century-old documents. Her eyes, a warm, intelligent brown that saw far too much, met mine, and she offered a small, apologetic smile that didn't quite reach them. I muttered a thanks, my face heating, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and spent the next hour staring at the same page of my notebook, seeing not the words, but the memory of her hands, the quiet grace of her. We began to orbit each other in that quiet space, a slow, gravitational dance. I found myself arriving earlier, staying later, inventing flimsy reasons to ask for her help with finding obscure references or navigating the digital catalog. We started with shy, fleeting smiles across the reading room, then progressed to whispered conversations about the relentless rain, the peculiarities of the collection, the best place to get a decent cup of coffee that didn't taste like burnt tires. Then came the day of the great storm, a sudden, torrential downpour that trapped us under the library's stone portico. The air was thick with the scent of wet concrete and ozone, the world washed in shades of gray. We stood side by side, not touching, watching the sheets of water drown the quad, and I confessed my silly, deeply ingrained fear of thunderstorms, a childish secret I hadn't told anyone, not even my long-term boyfriend. Instead of laughing or dismissing it, she nodded seriously, her gaze still on the deluge, and told me she found them cleansing, a necessary violence that washed the world clean, that made everything feel new and possible again. Then, she did something that shattered my carefully constructed world into a million iridescent pieces. She reached out and, with an intimacy that stole my breath, tucked that perpetually stray strand of my hair behind my ear. Her fingers were warm against my skin, her touch lingering for a fraction of a second too long, and the gesture was so effortlessly tender, so possessive, that I stopped breathing altogether. The world narrowed to the point of contact, the roar of the rain, and the profound, terrifying understanding in her eyes. That was the moment the ground gave way beneath my feet. That was the moment I began to fall, and I knew, with a sickening lurch of my stomach, that there would be no net to catch me. The fear set in immediately, a cold, familiar companion slithering into the space where that beautiful warmth had been. My family's expectations were a constant, low hum in the background of my life, a soundtrack of subtle pressure. Their questions about when I'd finally find a nice boy and settle down, their proudly displayed photos of cousins in white dresses with their grinning husbands, their unspoken but palpable relief that I, the bookish, awkward one, was at least dating a man. It was a weight I carried every day. The thought of telling them, of seeing that relief curdle into confusion or, worse, disgust, was a physical pain in my chest, a vice around my lungs. So I did what I thought was the only sensible, the only safe thing. I ran. I created a distraction, a shield. I actively logged back into the dating app one had abandoned and swiped right on men with kind eyes and uncomplicated, straightforward bios. Ben was the third one I went out with. He was a high school history teacher, stable, genuinely funny, and kind. On our first date at a nice, brightly lit Italian restaurant, I remember focusing intently on the way he meticulously cut his steak, thinking, this is it. This is what normal feels like. This is safety. I could build a life with this. I could be safe here. I introduced him to my parents over a painfully cheerful Sunday brunch, and their approving, relieved smiles felt like both a victory and a life sentence. I started bringing him to every group outing with my friends, my arm linked tightly through his, a smiling, convincing fraud, performing the role of happy girlfriend with an Academy Award-worthy dedication. The more serious and public my relationship with Ben became, the more desperate and furtive my connection to Clara grew. It was a frantic, secret counterpoint to my public life, a beautiful, dangerous underground river flowing swiftly beneath the placid surface. Our encounters shifted from the neutral territory of the library to hidden corners of the city, places where we felt invisible. We'd meet at obscure art house cinemas on the other side of town, sitting in the very back row, our shoulders and thighs pressed together in the comforting darkness, the tension between us a living, breathing thing. The first time she kissed me, it was in the dim, slightly damp hallway of her apartment building, after a long walk through the park where our hands had swung between us, close enough to feel the magnetic pull, but never quite touching. She stopped just outside her door, turned to me, and her gaze dropped to my lips. There was a silent, profound question in her eyes. My breath caught in my throat, my entire body humming with a terrifying anticipation, and I gave the smallest, most terrified nod. Her kiss was nothing like Ben's. It was soft, searching, a question, and an answer all at once. It tasted of the mint tea we'd just shared and a longing so deep it felt bottomless. When she finally pulled away, she didn't go far, just rested her forehead against mine, her breath warm and quick on my face, and whispered my name like it was the most sacred secret in the world. That single kiss became the axis on which my world spun. Every perfunctory kiss with Ben after that was a lie, a hollow echo, but every stolen, breathless moment with Clara felt like the only truth I had ever known. We began a delicate, dangerous dance, a double life that was both exhilarating and exhausting. I learned the landscape of her body in the quiet, sun-drenched sanctuary of her bedroom, with the afternoon light filtering through her linen curtains, painting golden stripes across her skin. Her touch was a language of its own, speaking in whispers against my neck, in the trail of her fingers down the sensitive curve of my spine, in the way she would cradle my face in her hands as if I were something precious and fragile. I would lie with my head on her chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of her heart, her fingers tracing lazy, absent-minded patterns on my bare back. In those moments, the gnawing guilt would recede, replaced by a sense of rightness so profound it was dizzying. She never asked me to leave Ben. She never pressured me with ultimatums or angry words. She just loved me with a quiet, unwavering patience that felt both like a precious gift and a heavy, unspoken judgment. In the deep, vulnerable dark of her bed, she would ask about my fears, her voice a soft murmur against my hair, and I would whisper my terror of disappointing my family, of being seen as different, of losing the easy. Unthinking acceptance I'd worked so hard to cultivate. She listened, she absorbed my pain, and her understanding silence was a heavier weight than any argument could ever be. The turning point, the moment the carefully built house of cards began to tremble, came on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. Ben had been talking with increasing frequency and a bright, hopeful glint in his eye about looking at rings. The word future was now a constant, looming presence in his vocabulary, and it felt like a cage slowly closing in around me, the walls painted in cheerful, conventional colors. I had agreed to meet Clara at our usual, out-of-the-way cafe, a small, bohemian place with mismatched chairs where we felt invisible, a bubble of us against the world. But when I arrived, flustered and 10 minutes late, my hand still tingling from Ben's possessive goodbye kiss at my doorstep, my blood ran cold. There, seated at a prime table by the window, were my mother and her friend Carol from her book club. My heart plummeted to my shoes. Clara was already there, waiting at our secluded corner table, a small, hopeful smile touching her lips as she saw me. I had a choice to make in the space of a single, frantic heartbeat, a decision that would carve its path through all our lives. I could walk past my mother's table, my head held high, and go to Clara, exposing the truth in a public, catastrophic explosion that would reverberate through my family forever. Or I could perform. I chose the performance. I walked straight to my mother's table, a bright, brittle smile plastered on my face, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped, panicked bird. I made cheerful, inane small talk about the weather and Carol's new grandchildren, my body positioned with my back deliberately turned to Clara, a physical rejection that felt like a self-inflicted wound. I could feel her gaze on me, a physical weight, a laser of hurt and understanding burning into my shoulder blades. I didn't look at her, not once. I couldn't. After a few eternal minutes of agonizing chatter, I felt a subtle shift in the air, a release of tension. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Our table was empty. Just a half-finished cup of tea and a paper napkin, neatly folded, as if she had never been there at all. She was gone. The cost of my deception was a cold, hollow space opening up in the very center of my chest, a void that threatened to swallow me whole. The days that followed were a special kind of hell, a slow-motion torture of my own making. Clara didn't answer my texts. My calls went straight to voicemail. She wasn't at the library. A temporary replacement was at her desk. Her silence was a louder, more devastating scream than any argument could have been. The guilt became a corrosive acid, eating away at me from the inside, tainting every interaction, every thought. I was short and snappish with Ben, my patience worn to a frayed thread. I couldn't sleep, staring at the ceiling while he slumbered peacefully beside me, his trust a heavy blanket smothering me. I jumped at every sound, every ping of my phone, my nerves stretched wire-tight. I was losing myself, piece by piece, in the ever-widening gap between the woman I pretended to be for the world and the woman I truly was in the secret, sacred space I shared with Clara. I was a ghost in my own life. I finally broke down completely one evening after a stilted dinner with Ben. I drove to her apartment through a pounding rain, standing on her doorstep like a cliché from a sad movie, soaked and shivering, not from the cold, but from the sheer, bone-deep terror of losing her forever. She opened the door, her face etched with a quiet, profound exhaustion that was infinitely worse than anger. She let me in, and the air in her small living room was thick with the ghosts of our broken promises. I tried to explain, my words tumbling out in a messy, tear-filled jumble about family pressure and suffocating fear and how much I loved her. She just listened, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze steady and unbearably sad. When I was finished, my voice raw and broken, she spoke, her voice soft but unyielding. She told me she loved me, had always loved me, but she couldn't be my secret anymore. She couldn't be the other woman, the shadow life, the stolen hours. She deserved someone who would love her openly, proudly, in the light for all the world to see. And so did I. Her words weren't an ultimatum. They were a simple, devastating statement of fact, a truth I had been too cowardly to face. She was setting me free from the lie, but it felt like a death sentence. I went home to my apartment, the one I shared with Ben, and I ended it. It was a brutal, ugly, and profoundly unfair conversation. I couldn't give him a real reason, a tangible fault. I could only offer him a choked, repetitive, "I can't do this anymore. I'm so sorry. I just can't," which felt as insubstantial and cruel as it sounded. The hurt and utter confusion in his eyes, the way his face crumpled from disbelief to pain, will haunt me for the rest of my life. I had used a good, kind man as a human shield, and in the process, I had broken his heart and shattered my own integrity into a million pieces. In the immediate wreckage of that breakup, with my parents' confused and disappointed phone calls ringing in my ears and the deafening, absolute silence from Clara's side of the world, I finally hit bottom. I sat on the floor of my soon-to-be former apartment, surrounded by the scattered detritus of the life I'd tried so hard to build, and I sobbed until I was hollow. I cried for Ben, for the pain I had caused him. I cried for Clara, for the love I had compromised and betrayed. I cried for the young, frightened girl I'd been, too terrified to step into her own truth. I had lost them both, and I had no one to blame but myself, my own fear a more effective destroyer than any external force could ever be. In that raw, utterly shattered state, a terrible, painful clarity finally emerged. I couldn't live the lie anymore. The cost was simply too high. The pretending was a cancer in my soul, and it was killing me slowly and surely. The weeks that followed my breakup with Ben were a bleak landscape of necessary endings and painful beginnings. I moved out of our shared apartment, finding a small, sterile studio that held no memories, no ghosts. The silence there was absolute, a stark contrast to the life I had just dismantled. I started seeing a therapist, a calm, no-nonsense woman named Dr. Evans, who helped me begin the slow, arduous work of untangling the knots of family expectation and internalized fear that had dictated my every move for nearly 3 decades. It was grueling, painful work. Some days, the loneliness was a physical ache, a constant companion in the quiet of my new space. The easy invitations from coupled-up friends dried up. I was now a single, slightly tragic figure in their social landscape. But for the first time in my adult life, I was being honest. I was just me alone, with no performance, no shield, no boyfriend as a buffer between me and the world. It was terrifying, but it was also clean. The weight of the lie was gone, and in its place was a hollowed-out space that, while painful, was at least mine to fill with something real. I threw myself into my dissertation, using the rigorous demands of academic research as a lifeline. The library, once my sanctuary and then the stage for my secret romance, became just a library again. I avoided the archives, the specific corral, the route we used to walk together. The pain was still too fresh, a wound that felt like it might never scab over. I thought about Clara constantly. Her absence was a phantom limb, an ache I felt with every breath. I missed the scent of jasmine and old paper that clung to her clothes, the sound of her quiet laugh, the way she would look at me as if I were the only person in the world. I missed the feeling of her hand in mine, a perfect, grounding fit. The memory of our last conversation, of the profound exhaustion in her eyes, was a constant rebuke. I had taken her beautiful, patient love and made it something sordid, a secret to be ashamed of. The guilt over how I had treated her was, in some ways, even sharper than the guilt over Ben. I had betrayed her trust on a fundamental level, and the knowledge was a shard of glass in my heart. One afternoon, after a therapy session that had left me feeling raw but clear-headed, I found myself standing outside the library, my heart pounding. Dr. Evans had asked me what I was truly afraid of now, and the answer had come to me with startling clarity. I was afraid of a life defined by that single, cowardly choice. I was afraid of never seeing Clara again. Armed with a trembling, hard-won courage I didn't know I possessed, I pushed through the heavy doors. The familiar smell of old paper and dust greeted me, a scent that would always be intertwined with her. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart a frantic drum in my chest as I walked, my footsteps echoing in the silence, toward the archive wing. And there she was, bent over a sprawling manuscript at her desk, her honey-colored braid a familiar and dear sight that made my throat tighten so painfully I could barely swallow. She looked up, sensing a presence, and for a long, suspended moment, we just looked at each other across the quiet room. I saw the surprise in her eyes, then a flicker of caution, a wall going up to protect herself, and then, slowly, a fragile, guarded hope. I didn't have a grand speech prepared. All my carefully rehearsed words fled. I just walked toward her, my heart in my throat, and when I reached her desk, I told her the simple, unvarnished truth. That I was done hiding. That I was still terrified of a lot of things, but I was free. That I loved her more than I knew how to express with words, and if she would have me, I would spend every single day of the rest of my life proving that I was worthy of her love, a love that deserved to be lived in the bright, open light for everyone to see. I reached for her hand, my fingers trembling, and when they laced with hers, it felt like coming home after a long, brutal, and lonely journey. She didn't say anything. She simply stood, her eyes shining with unshed tears, leaned in, and kissed me. It was a different kiss than all the others, softer, slower, filled with the grief of our separation and the fragile, brilliant, overwhelming hope of a new beginning. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of hard-won understanding, of a love that had been tested in the fire of deceit and fear and had, against all odds, refused to break. We took things slowly this time, building a new relationship on a foundation of honesty, one careful brick at a time. Our first dates were in the open, at busy restaurants and public parks. It felt strange and wonderful to be able to reach for her hand across a table without first scanning the room for familiar faces. I introduced her to my closest friends as my girlfriend, my voice steady and proud, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. Their acceptance was immediate and warm, a balm on my raw nerves. Telling my family was its own mountain to climb, a story for another time filled with tears and difficult conversations and strained silences. But I did it with her hand holding mine, her presence a solid rock in the turbulent sea of their initial reactions. It wasn't easy. There were questions I didn't have answers to, and a disappointment from my mother that hung in the air for months. But I held my ground, not with anger, but with a quiet conviction that this was who I was. For the first time, I was not asking for their permission. I was telling them my truth. Our love was no longer a hidden thing, a shameful secret to be kept in the dark. It was our life, open and real. We built a home together, a real home this time, not just an apartment. We painted the walls together, bickering good-naturedly over color swatches. We filled the space with our mingled books, her beautiful, abstract paintings on the walls, and the quiet, deep, abiding joy of a love that didn't need to be explained or defended, a love that could simply be. We developed our own routines. Sunday mornings were for lazy lovemaking and reading the newspaper in bed. Wednesday evenings were for trying out complicated new recipes, usually ending with a messy kitchen and laughter. It was all so beautifully, wonderfully ordinary, and every mundane moment felt like a miracle to me. One evening, about a year after we had moved in together, we were curled up on our sofa, a soft blanket thrown over our legs. A documentary played quietly on the television, but neither of us was really watching. My head was in her lap, and her fingers were slowly, absently combing through my hair. The peace in the room was a tangible thing, a warm, heavy blanket of contentment. I thought back to the rooftop bar, to the taste of ash and the feeling of my soul tearing apart. I thought of the desperate, secret kisses and the crushing weight of the lie. I rolled onto my back to look up at her. Her face was softened in the lamplight, her expression one of such profound peace that it made my heart ache. Do you ever think about it? I asked softly, my voice barely a whisper. About before? Her fingers stilled in my hair for a moment, and her brown eyes met mine. She knew exactly what I meant. Sometimes, she said, her voice equally quiet, but not with the same pain. Now it just feels like a storm we had to walk through to get here. To get to this. She gestured slightly around our warm, cozy living room. The storm made me appreciate the calm. I reached up and touched her cheek, my thumb stroking the curve of her jaw. I'm so sorry, Clara. For all of it. For the hiding. For hurting you. She leaned down and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead. I know, she murmured against my skin. But you found your way out. That's all that matters. In that moment, the last lingering shard of guilt, the one I had carried deep inside me, finally dissolved. It was replaced by a feeling of such immense gratitude it was almost overwhelming. She had seen me at my worst, my most cowardly, and she had still loved me enough to wait for me to find my courage. Life moved forward, not in a dramatic, cinematic sweep, but in a series of small, perfect moments. We went on vacations, arguing over maps and getting gloriously lost. We celebrated promotions and comforted each other through losses. We navigated the complexities of merging our lives, our finances, our families. It wasn't always easy. We had our disagreements, our moments of friction. But the foundation of honesty we had built meant we faced them head-on, without fear of the relationship itself collapsing. A few years later, on a random Tuesday evening, she cooked my favorite meal. There were candles on the table, which I thought was sweet, but didn't think much of. After dinner, as we were washing the dishes together, her shoulder bumping against mine, she turned off the water and took my wet, soapy hands in hers. Her eyes were serious, her smile a little nervous. She didn't get down on one knee. She just looked at me, right into the heart of me, and said, I want to spend every single one of my Tuesdays with you. And every other day, too. Will you marry me? I started crying immediately, nodding, unable to form words, and kissed her with the taste of soap and certainty on my lips. Our wedding was small, in a sunlit garden, surrounded by the people who had loved us through our journey. When I saw her waiting for me at the end of the aisle, in a simple, elegant dress, her smile radiant and just for me, I felt a sense of completion so profound it stole my breath. I had spent so long living a life that was a performance, a careful imitation of what I thought I was supposed to be. But walking toward her, I was finally, completely, and unapologetically myself. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the evening, with the day settling around us like a soft blanket, I will look at her reading on our sofa, her feet tucked under her, the soft light from the lamp catching the gold and copper strands in her hair. And I will remember the immense cost of this love, the pain I caused, the lies I told, the trust one broke. The memory of that time is a scar, a permanent part of my history, reminder of the person I never want to be again. But as I watch her, so perfectly at home in the space we've created together, a soft smile touching her lips as she reads, I know with a certainty that settles deep in my bones that every painful, agonizing step of that journey was worth it. I dated a man to hide the truth, a desperate, cowardly act born of fear that nearly destroyed me and wounded others. But my heart, my stubborn, truthful, rebellious heart, had always belonged to her. It had whispered her name when my lips were saying another's. It had chosen her in a crowded library, in a rainstorm, in 1,000 secret moments, long before I had the courage to admit it. And in the end, after all the struggle and the pain and the self-inflicted chaos, it was my heart, finally listened to, that led me home.